If there was a way to tap into a part of your inner being that allowed you to become the best possible version of yourself, transcending every physical and mental limitation you have, would you do it? I think most people probably would. But what if you could only experience this transcendental power for a few minutes every few years? You might fall into a routine where each waking moment is spent pining for that superhuman potential, just waiting around to feel like yourself again. It could make the rest of your life feel rather hollow, don't you think? I suppose you could always plan your life around these moments, making sure to maximize their potential when they crop up and living normally otherwise, but then I suppose you'd also have to find a way to predict when these moments are going to arrive. And that is the dilemma at the core of this week's monster, the Eclipse Giant. Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the show where we dig up creatures from D&D's ancient past, talk about why they're awesome, and convert them into 5th edition. Today, we're gonna mix things up a little bit by talking about a monster from D&D 3rd edition's weird cousin, Pathfinder. Longtime viewers of the channel will likely already be familiar with both the Sun and Moon Giants from Pathfinder, so today, we're gonna be completing the trio of cosmic giants by introducing the Eclipse Giant to Dungeons & Dragons. So get your ISO 12312-22015 certified glasses on, and prepare to stare directly at the most intriguing member of the giant species yet. Eclipse Giants made their debut alongside the Sun and Moon Giants as part of Pathfinder's Bestiary 5, released in 2015. Visually, they appear as humanoid beings with skin ranging from dark gray to pitch black. Their skin is also marked by countless stark white tattoos depicting all manner of celestial bodies. But what really sets them apart from all the other giants is their size. I don't think it's presumptuous of me to assume we all know giants are big, right? After all, they're literally giant people. But Eclipse Giants are truly massive in scale. They are the only member of the giant family that exists in the gargantuan size category, which is the largest one. To really emphasize how big these creatures actually are, let's compare them to the next largest giant in D&D, the Storm Giant. According to the 5e Monster Manual, Storm Giants stand at a whopping 7.9 meters, or 26 freedom units. Eclipse Giants clock in at a casual 12.2 meters, which is approximately 40 feet tall. These guys are so fucking large that they make Storm Giants seem small by comparison, and Hill Giants are downright tiny. And compared to your average human, you'll be lucky if you can see over its big toe. Also, their hair drifts around them as if completely unaffected by gravity, so if you're ever unsure that a 40-foot tall cosmically tattooed giant in front of you is an Eclipse Giant, just look for the magical white Fabio locks. Now you might gaze upon this literal mountain of a man and presume that they belong to the barbarian warrior type class of creatures, but you'd be wrong, unless you didn't assume that, in which case I'm sorry for making assumptions about your presumptive nature. While it is true that due to their massive size, they're capable of dishing out a ton of physical damage, Eclipse Giants are not particularly violent and actually lean more towards the peaceful end of the spectrum. While certainly not above doing violence, they are wanderers at heart who always keep an eye to the heavens in search of cosmological omens and signs. And they do this for a very good reason. Hidden within each Eclipse Giant is a font of limitless potential, an idea that the giant refers to as their true self. This true self lays dormant, completely inaccessible to the giant for most of its life. However, during either a lunar or solar eclipse, the true self within every Eclipse Giant awakens. This true self and the power it grants varies from each individual giant to each individual giant. It might manifest as a spark of infinite creativity, allowing that giant to write poetry and plays that are works of brilliant art, any one of which might grant such profound insight into the world that it would certainly become an instant cultural touchstone for those who read it. Or it could unlock a supernatural level of skill in combat, making them practically invincible during the time of the eclipse, allowing a giant warrior to charge into combat with no possible possible outcome other than an overwhelming victory. There aren't any defined rules about what this true self has to be, but I find a helpful analogy is to think of it as a sort of dormant superpower. Anyone even remotely familiar with comic books or every movie made in the past 5 years will be able to tell you that there's a wide array of powers someone might have, and each one can be as useful or as useless as you make it. I mean, the practical applications of becoming Superman every time there's an eclipse are pretty obvious. But maybe there's a giant out there who can bake an insanely good loaf of bread during the eclipse, or a giant who knows the secret to crafting an elixir of immortality, but the formula is so long and overly complex you can only jot down 1% of it during the few minutes granted by each eclipse, and has slowly been building up his research over a lifetime. There truly is no limit to what you as the DM could potentially do here, and as you can imagine, this phenomenon makes the coming of an eclipse extremely important to these giants. If I knew, for example, that I could only make one YouTube video every year, and I could only do it during a very specific window of time, I would want to know as far in advance as possible when that window of time was so I could prepare for it. And that is why these giants always have an eye to the sky. Their entire culture is built around the movements of stars and planets. They do their utmost to track the heavens in an effort to predict when the next eclipse might arise. And of course, they plan accordingly. If, say, the giants are planning to go to war, they will wait until the date of an upcoming eclipse to do so. While the window of time afforded by an eclipse is relatively small, ranging from a few minutes to a few hours in the case of a lunar eclipse, that is still enough time to do a ton of damage to the enemy. But combat aside, there are tons of other benefits granted by this eclipse that the giants can leverage. And because this is so important, it makes any individual with the ability to foresee these events an extremely valuable member of their society. Among Eclipse giant kind, there are a few special individuals called seers who can seemingly predict the future and foretell when an eclipse is going to happen. These individuals hold a special station within Eclipse giant society akin to a priest. They're treated as messengers from the heavens, and they present themselves as something almost divine. From the outside, they might appear as mysterious and powerful divination magic users, but in reality, they're just really good at math. All seers are gifted and highly educated in the field of astrophysics. I mean, they probably don't use the word astrophysics, but essentially, the seers are all just giant nerds. These guys study the stars constantly, making note of every change, every pattern, and every oddity that they witness, all in service of a complex formula they've developed to aid in eclipse prediction. So while every Eclipse giant is bound to have a vested interest in this stuff, the seers are particularly exceptional in their ability to read the stars. But this fascination with the stars isn't just a practical one. It also bleeds into every aspect of their culture and truly shapes the way they look at the world. They see the stars as a sort of cosmic map, a record of how things were when any event should occur, and the tattoos on their body represent this outlook perfectly. For example, they might get a tattoo depicting the position of the stars on a night that they went into battle for the first time. Or perhaps they have a star chart mapping out the night that a child was born. They may even get tattoos of celestial maps that lead the way to a place of importance. There's tons of different things that these tattoos can be representative of, but each one of them is sure to be something near and dear to the giant's heart. Or maybe they just get a tattoo of the Big Dipper because they think it's neat.
I just think they're neat.
And speaking of things that are neat, did you know Bob Worldbuilder has a D&D book on Kickstarter right now? Delve is a book all about building and surviving deadly dungeons for both D&D and Shadowdark. Also, they're our sponsor of the week. In an age where classic dungeon delves are becoming less and less common, I am stoked to see a new book coming out entirely focused on not just creating dungeons for your game, but providing players with some new options to enable their most daring feats of dungeoneering. Fun fact, did you know that back in D&D 3rd edition, knowledge dungeoneering used to be one of the core skills? It's no wonder that nobody knows anything about aberrations, caverns, oozes, and spelunking anymore. We don't even have a skill for it. But now your players can acquire that skill with Delve, the book I was just talking about. It offers 10 wholly original plug-and-play dungeons, 40 new magic items, 40 new monsters, some new monster mechanics, 40 new traps and hazards, as well as a handful of subclasses, feats, and species for D&D 5e. Truly, there is something for everyone. Or you're like me, and all of that sounds cool. But that's not even taking into account their stretch goals. I guess there's no guarantee they'll even get funded, but they got funded in 13 minutes! Now, I don't want to take all the credit for that, but I did create a pretty awesome brand new Fey creature that's going to be included in this book, so that probably helped. It looks pretty sweet, right? I guess I should probably introduce him. Hello and welcome to Monster of the MIDROLL, the only show on the internet that puts a Monster of the Week into your Monster of the Week. The Gadai is a multi-armed fae creature who uses art and color as both its weapon and reason for being. They're tall, have a lot of arms, and are very creepy. Also, if it paints your portrait, congratulations, it just stole your soul and turned you into a sentient canvas, which is bad.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
But if you want to see what the Gadai truly has up its many sleeves, along with all the other dungeon-related goodness packed into this book, you gotta check it out on Kickstarter. I don't make the rules, that's just the way it is. How the heck do you even do that? Well, it's easy. You just follow the link in the description down below, and it will take you right over to the Delve Kickstarter page, wherein you can check out the book for yourself and choose the pledge level that best suits your needs. Delve is promising to provide us with some really great new tools for running dungeons that should make the process easier and a lot more fun. Also, Bob is just an incredible designer, and I have the utmost faith in him and his team to delviver on something really awesome here. Oh, that's stupid. Don't keep that in the video. And if I can just speak to you directly for a second, Bob, thank you for sponsoring this episode. It means a lot to me, and I'm really looking forward to see what you cook up for this book. I'm sorry I'm so bad at doing ad reads. Now, back to our gargantuan star-skinned man. Eclipse giants are, in my opinion, undeniably intriguing at the very least, and I think they've got a ton of potential to really add a lot to any campaign they're included in. Like, I think they might currently be my favorite giant, and I love giants, so that's saying a lot. But before we talk about how you might actually use one of these large lads at the game table, there are a few things on its stat sheet we need to go over first. Weird things. As you might have guessed, based purely on the size of these absolute units, the Eclipse Giant is a powerful creature. It clocks in with a challenge rating of 17, which is by far the highest CR rating I've ever seen for a true giant. And I think that's really cool because it gives us a high CR option for a type of creature that doesn't have a lot of representation at that level. Currently in D&D 5e, the highest level giant we have is the Storm Giant Quintessent from Monsters of the Multiverse, which clocks in at CR 16. But of the 27 creatures with the giant type, it's the only one above CR 15. And it's not even a new type of giant, but rather just a powered up version of the Storm Giant with extra abilities. And I think that should serve as a good illustration of how powerful this giant actually is. The average Eclipse giant who just hangs around is more powerful than an elite member of the next most powerful giant species. So theoretically, an elite powered up version of this giant would be like in the CR 20 plus range, but I digress. The first thing this giant has going for it mechanically is, of course, its size. Being so large not only gives the giant plenty of reach and a commanding battlefield presence, but it also means that these big boys are rolling d20s for their HP. And a d20 is the biggest one. Now, much like the Sun and Moon giants before them, the Eclipse giant has a ton of really flavorful abilities that make it a true threat. They have a massive dark vision radius and the Eyes of the Dark trait, which means that they can see through mundane and magical darkness. They're also immune to being blinded, which for a creature who likes to stare at the sun and stars is a really useful trait. When it comes to attacks, they've got a big ol' serrated longsword they like to swing around that does a massive chunk of damage, and it scores a critical hit on both a 19 or a 20. And of course, they've got access to the old tried and true giant weapon of choice, chucking a fucking rock at somebody's head. Their rock attack is a bit different though, because whenever they throw a rock at another creature, they can imbue it with a little dash of magic to either heal or harm the creature they're targeting. If they choose to imbue the rock with destructive magic, it deals an additional 10d10 necrotic damage if it connects. And if they should imbue it with soothing light, and the other creature manages to catch the rock, it heals them for 10d10. And of course, that is where the giant's rock catching trait comes into play. See, whenever the giant is targeted by a thrown weapon attack, they can use the reaction to attempt a DC 15 Dex save, a roll they are literally guaranteed to make unless they roll a natural 1. If they do succeed, they can catch or deflect the projectile away. So in other words, this is a great defensive tool, but it also allows the giants to heal each other if things get a little bit spicy by passing around the magic morphine rock. The drawback here is it does require the giant's reaction to use, and of course there's always that 5% chance they're not going to catch it and instead get beamed in the head by their buddy. But 95% of the time, it's gonna work out great. These giants also have access to a handful of spells like Darkness, Daylight, Moonbeam, Cone of Cold, and Death Ward, all of which are useful in their own way, but Death Ward especially is great because they can cast it at will. Death Ward is a 4th level spell with a real simple effect. If you drop to 0 HP while under the spell's effect, the spell ends, and instead, you only drop to 1 hit point. It lasts for 8 hours, and it takes an action to cast it, meaning that they should basically always be under the effects of this spell, and so should all of their allies. It also speaks to a side of the giants we haven't yet discussed, and that is their mastery in natural connection with death magic. The original monster entry doesn't get super in depth on this, but the giants seem to have a certain level of mastery over life and death due to their constant study of the stars. They're not exactly necromancers, but they've got a really good understanding of the fundamental cyclical nature of the multiverse. And apparently, that means they can kill you like they're fucking flicking off a light switch. The Eclipse Giant has a once per day action called Snuff Life. And believe it or not, this ability snuffs out things that are filled with life. The giant can target a creature within 30 feet of it using this ability, and then target another creature within 30 feet of the first creature, repeating this process until it has targeted up to 9 living creatures in a chain leading back to the giant. What's really interesting about this ability is that its effects are different based on the level of the character that it's affecting. If the creature is above CR 14, or in the case of a player, level 14, they simply take 6d12 necrotic damage, saving for half. However, the weaker the life force of the target, the more damage they take, meaning that this power uses inverse scaling to determine its effects. If you're between level 11 to 14, you take 8d12 necrotic damage and you get your movement speed sapped. If you're between level 6 to 10, you take 10d12 necrotic damage and you're stunned. And if you're level 5 or lower, you just straight up die, and if you do save, your HP is reduced to 1.
I didn't hear no bell.
Granted, if you're level 5 or lower and you're fighting an Eclipse Giant, either your DM hates you, or you've really fucked up somehow. But the fact that this giant can just straight up delete a few people once per day with a goddamn snap of its fingers is terrifying. What's especially terrifying is when in the presence of other creatures that actually pose a threat, rather than deal the damage to them, they often choose to use this ability as an intimidation tactic. Like sure, it might not be able to kill you in one shot, but it can just hit end task on all the minions you brought with you, and that's scary. But what I think is truly the defining trait of the Eclipse Giant is the one that gives some in-game rules to how it might benefit from an eclipse. Eclipse Empowered is a pretty simple paragraph that states whenever the giant is within line of sight to an eclipse, it gets advantage on all of its rolls, it's immune to being frightened, it gains 20 temp HP every turn, it becomes immune to non-magical damage, and it can't be killed by instant death effects such as power word kill. That's a whole lot of upside, but remember, this ability is only active when the giant is in the presence of an eclipse, which is something that shouldn't happen all that often. And if we're talking about a solar eclipse, that's not a lot of time. A lunar eclipse, on the other hand, though, can last a long while, but we're still dealing with an 8-hour window at most, give or take. And in either case, this is an event that only transpires once every couple years, so it should be very powerful. It's like their whole deal. In fact, I would encourage you to add even more stuff on top of the benefits listed here, because this is truly just the baseline of improvement for an Eclipse Giant. It doesn't factor in anything that a specific giant's nature might entail. So maybe your giant who writes really good poetry also has maxed out charisma and proficiency in performance, or maybe the warlike giant gains access to a barbarian rage-like effect and gets extra attacks or something. The point is, this trait is there for you to fall back on if you don't feel like prepping anything specific or you get caught off guard by an eclipse, which should be impossible considering the DM is the one who controls when that happens, but maybe you're using like a random stellar events table or something. I don't know. It's there for you if you need it. Now, before we move on to talk about plot hooks and story stuff regarding this giant, I want to talk about legendary actions for a sec. I went completely off book here and just added some legendary actions to this giant to make it a bit more of a dynamic encounter, simply because a lot of creatures at this level and beyond have legendary actions, and it felt appropriate to me. You don't have to use these if you hate them, but I think they might impose a dash of that precious je ne sais quoi us DMs are always looking for when building our combat encounters. My Eclipse Giant gets 3 legendary actions per turn and has 3 options to choose from. The first is called Lunar Eclipse. This legendary action allows the giant to cast Moonbeam or move the location of its active Moonbeam if the spell is already going. This will allow it to get in a bit more damage and absolutely dummy any lycanthropes that are present. Its second action, Solar Eclipse, causes the giant to glow with a brilliant corona until the start of its next turn. During this time, if a creature targets the giant with an attack or ability that requires sight, they're blinded for the rest of the turn. They can, of course, avert their eyes, but looking away from the thing you're trying to attack also imposes disadvantage, so the results are basically the same. Its third and final legendary action, called Total Eclipse, costs all 3 actions, and it's a doozy. When the giant uses this ability, it is surrounded by a 120-foot area of magical darkness centered on itself until the start of its next turn. As we know, these giants can see through magical darkness, and as any good min-maxer will tell you, being able to see through magical darkness while your enemies can't is very powerful. Now, this ability only lasts until the giant's next turn, so it won't get too out of hand. I mean, it could potentially spam this ability each round if it really wanted to, but as a DM, I probably wouldn't do that, and even if it did, at this level the players should have something to deal with magical darkness. But most importantly, this ability is very useful to the giant for disengaging from a fight that's turning against it.
One last all or nothing gambit! It's my final move! Run for your life!
It's also a great way to buy some time so a group of giants can toss a healing rock back and forth. And depending where they are in the initiative, if you've got a few Eclipse giants working together, they can cover each other's turns with darkness, and that has potential to get out of hand really fast if the players have no way to deal with it, which they should. But speaking of things getting out of hand, let's talk about your D&D campaign and how you might actually deploy this thing to be a part of it. Alright, I have a ton of stuff to say about this monster's story and plot hook potential, so I'm gonna just start talking and not stop until my brain is empty. First off, the star charts on the giant's skin are really interesting to me. Obviously, they're just visually cool, but when you're talking about something that can literally be a map, there are so many ways to fit that into a story. Maybe the players are looking for a map to some long-lost location, and they discover a lead that tells them the only known map to that spot is hidden within a mountainous cavern or something. They go there looking for a map, and instead find a giant, only to then realize the giant literally is the map. So perhaps they work with the giant, or maybe they fight him and peel the skin off his pinky or something, but however that turns out, what a cool twist on a classic trope. I especially like this idea for a Spelljammer campaign. After all, star maps and Spelljammer are just so important a lot of the time. Having a creature that is a living collection of star charts, just cool. Also, if you've seen any of my other giant videos, you knew I was gonna at least mention this, but I wanna know how these guys fit into the ordning. Now, I know the ordning is not a thing in every D&D setting, but I think it's a neat concept, and there's no harm in discussing it. Just humor me here for a sec. For those unaware, the ordning is the hierarchical system the true giants in the Forgotten Realms use as a pseudo-system of government, with hill giants on the bottom and storm giants on the top. It seems only reasonable to me that the Eclipse giants would sit at the very top given the immense power gap between them and the other giants. But that also got me thinking, what if they're just part of an entirely separate system? I've now covered Sun, Moon, and Eclipse giants from Pathfinder, all of which have crossover and connection between their cultures, so what if we just treat them like dragons? I mean, we've got metallic dragons and chromatic dragons, both of which are obviously dragon families, but they are also fundamentally different in a lot of ways. Applying that same idea here, we could have ordning giants and cosmic giants. Maybe there's some kind of hierarchy between these 3 species, or perhaps they have some other common thread that connects them. Personally, I really like the idea that they have a system similar to the ordning, but rather than a structured hierarchy, the Sun and Moon giants rule in phases, with one species being the authority for half the year and the other taking over the remaining half. And perhaps the Eclipse giants sort of function as an intermediary power. They're the ones who oversee the transfer of power between the other 2 species, but never actually take on the responsibilities of leadership themselves. That's just one idea for something you could do here, but there are tons of different ways you could take this if you want to establish a new ordning of giants. Another thing that really got me thinking is the existence of the seers I mentioned previously. The book is very clear that seers don't predict the future with magic, they use complex formulas to calculate when the next eclipse is going to happen. And that's interesting just on its face in a world where the arcane is often so ubiquitous, but what if this odd methodology of predicting when an eclipse is going to happen actually granted the seers insight into some future event that is going unnoticed by the rest of the arcane world? Perhaps there's a malignant threat lurking within the stars, waiting to enact a horrible cataclysm upon the material plane, and this threat has gone completely unnoticed by divination wizards across the world because it's able to somehow conceal itself from magical detection. But whatever it's up to is affecting the cosmos in some way, and while the oracles of the world simply don't notice, the Eclipse giant seers do. They manage to determine that something truly horrible is about to happen, and they travel out into the world to warn warn the people of an impending doom. Do the people listen to them? Do they reject them as misguided fools? In either case, this could be a really interesting way to introduce a new race of giants into your world that is a bit quirky, and it could also be the setup for a mystery to be solved. What could possibly cause the stars themselves to seem distorted? I don't know. Could be all kinds of different stuff. Perhaps it's a weird eldritch monster. Perhaps it's someone dabbling in time magic that's messing with the position of the stars. Or maybe it's a cosmic entity like a genius loci in the shape of a moon, and it's rapidly approaching. Speaking of the genius loci, here's an idea for you. Well, really quick, I guess I should explain what that even is. A genius loci is a massive ooze-based creature that can replicate the landscape itself. It has no upper limit on size and can range anywhere from a couple of miles to a literal planet, and that's basically it. Got it? Good. I also did a video about them a while back, so go watch it if you haven't already. But now that we're all experts on the topic, what if a genius loci and a group of Eclipse giants were working together? The giants could have an arrangement with the loci that it will remain in front of the sun or moon at all times, putting their corner of the world into a perpetual state of eclipse. Whether the giants have villainous, heroic, or middling intentions, that is an absolutely wacky power imbalance to create. They're already so powerful, but if they could create a situation where they are always running at maximum capacity, the world as we know it would essentially be at their mercy. Imagine if there was an author who could just write a world-class best-selling novel every couple days, or a group of warriors that literally couldn't die, or just any super efficient being doing any skill you can conceive of. And now imagine that your entire society is made up of people like that. Assuming they are unified in their purpose, who could possibly stand against you? Even in situations where they might be outgunned, the giants might have someone on their side who is like a tactical genius during an eclipse, so their top general is just outmaneuvering anything that comes their way with ease. That amount of power from a society would be oppressive, even if not necessarily misused. And should the giants ever get a smidge evil with their intentions, it's over. What I'm getting at here is trying to stop that from happening, or liberating a world that is already under the thumb of Eclipse giants because this has already happened could make for a really interesting adventure. Genius loci are also really interesting creatures too, so there's a lot of room to explore there, I think. But moving on, obviously Eclipse giants are kind of taken out of the box with a ton of Eclipse-themed plot hooks attached to them, right? They can make great enemies if they decide to attack during an eclipse, making that window of time a strategically pivotal moment. But I also really like the idea of an Eclipse giant possessing some skill or trait during an eclipse that the players need to get access to. Maybe you have an Eclipse giant who during the eclipse has an incredible capacity for recalling anything they've ever read, so they spend most of their time outside of the eclipse reading old history books, and on the day of the eclipse itself, they can flawlessly recall anything that's happened on the material plane over the past 100,000 years or something. Or maybe the giant just gains the ability to answer questions accurately, even if it's something it doesn't actually know the answer to. So, if the players seek out this individual during an eclipse, they could say, I don't know, ask them what the true weakness of the big bad villain is. Or maybe ask them what the ritual involved is in destroying an indestructible artifact. There's all kinds of forbidden and unknowable things they could ask, and I think that would make for a really compelling encounter and a great goal to set before them. And speaking of giant powers, what if there is a giant out there with an incredibly dangerous power and the players are sent to deal with that? Maybe they go on an assassination mission because there's a giant who kills every living thing within 10,000 miles during the eclipse through no fault of his own necessarily. The death magic just leaks out of him or something. And the last time it happened, he wiped out an entire kingdom, just erased it right off the map. So now the players need to stop it from happening again. That could make for a really cool villain, but it could also make for a really interesting moral quandary if, say, the giant has no control over this ability and is otherwise a really good guy. Maybe then they decide not to kill him, but rather find a solution that involves getting him somewhere far away from any living thing. And then perhaps you have a villainous character who's trying to capture the giant and weaponize this trait. There's all kinds of different ways that can play out. And who knows, maybe the dangerous power isn't even something so simple as killing everyone. Maybe there's a giant who's able to commune with entities in the far realm during an eclipse. So now, a giant cult is seeking to perform a ritual and open a portal into the far realm by creating a link with the great old ones or something at the behest of this giant who wields the power to do so. And I love all of this just in general because it creates a ticking time bomb, right? Like if the players know something like this is going to happen, or just that something bad is going to happen, and they know an eclipse is supposed to occur in 3 weeks, suddenly there's a timer, and that, in my experience anyway, always makes an adventure more intense. Lastly, I won't get super off topic here, I promise, but there are lots of other creatures to be considered when you're putting together Sun and Moon and Eclipse related plot hooks. I've already mentioned the Sun and Moon Giants, but I think Sun and Moon Dragons could also fit in there somehow. Also, Moon Rats, for better or for worse, might have a relationship with any of the above stated creatures, and most of all, lycanthropes. I wonder how the magic, presence, and general vibe of an Eclipse Giant affects the lycanthropes. Does it hinder their curse, preventing them from transforming, or does it empower them, making them much more feral and dangerous? Or maybe it does neither of those things and simply alters the way their lycanthropy works somehow. Perhaps a werewolf turns into a chocolate lab in the presence of an Eclipse Giant or something. But in any case, if you want to do any of that, or put your own spin on things, I highly encourage you to do so, and you can do so by checking out the link in the description down below, which will bring you to a Google document that contains all of the stats and lore and information for this creature that you will need to successfully run it at your game table. And of course, if you're one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you can find the high-res PDF with the beautiful new artwork done by Maxwell Polikoff this week. I think he did an amazing job. And this PDF is just basically my way of saying thanks. It contains all the same information, but gives you a fancier tool to work with and helps me keep doing this. So if you want more of this, check it out. And speaking of patrons, I gotta give a big shout out to our patron of the week. This week's randomly selected patron is Casey Jones. It's very cool to have the support of Mr. Jones himself. Thank you so much. Give the turtles my regards. And thank you for watching. If there is a monster from an older edition of D&D, Pathfinder, some other TTRPG, or just pop culture, whatever, that you think would make a cool addition to the 5th edition bestiary, please let me know in the comments down below or over on the Dungeon Dad Discord server in the monster suggestions chat. I will add it to the list of creature suggestions, and you may just see it show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week. I'm sure many of you are wondering why I didn't release this video like 4 weeks ago when we actually had a solar eclipse happening, and the answer is I'm stupid. I was going to, and then my schedule just kept getting pushed forward and forward and forward because like the last few videos ended up taking a lot more time. So here we are. It was a month ago. I've fully missed the window on whatever boost in the algorithm doing that would have given me, but I think these giants are really cool, so I still wanted to talk about them anyway, and I didn't want to wait like 2 years or whatever it is until we're supposed to get another one, so it is what it is. But thank you guys so much for watching. I had a ton of fun making this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. And as always, if you don't mind leaving a like and a comment in the video, that does provide an algorithmic boost that doesn't require the movement of celestial bodies above, which is cool. Anyways, that's all for today. I'll see you in the next one. Till then.
There's a new pet.
Chia.
Chia Pet, the pottery that grows. It's fun and easy. Soak your chia, spread the seeds, keep it watered, and watch it grow. And now grow a whole collection of fun with chia teddy bears, puppies, kittens, rams, bulls. There's even a chia tree to keep your pets company. Chia Pets and Trees, the pottery that grows.
The Chia Pet and Chia Tree are available at Kmart, Rite Aid, Ames, and Woolworth.